Once again, my name is Adeni, and this course is brought to you by Smart Gen Hub, a human capital development platform. This is the last course under the training titled How to Transit from Unemployment to Full Employment Without Stress. And the title of this particular course is How to Become Successful in a Job Interview. There is no gainsaying the fact that this stage of recruitment process is one, if not the most important aspect of recruitment, because it is the stage where the final decision is being made during the recruitment process. It is the stage where the fate of each candidate will be decided. So your performance at this stage of the recruitment process is very critical and can determine what will happen to you for the rest of your life. So it is not the stage we can take with levity. It is not the stage we can take with pinch of salt. It is the stage we have to pull all our body, mind, and soul into to ensure that we deliver our best in order to get the best result out of it. Let me remind you, once you are at this stage, it means that you met the minimum requirement for the job. So everybody that is called to attend this stage met the minimum requirement for the job. It means you are now competing with qualified people. So how you outshine other candidates at this stage is very important and will determine whether you be the one that will occupy that position or not. Therefore, interview is not something you attend haphazardly. Interview is something you prepare beforehand and have right information at your disposal before you appear for the interview at all. And that is exactly what we'll be doing justice to right here in this course. How to be successful in a job interview. So we'll be going through different headings. What happens or what are you meant to do days before the interview? Let's assume that you have received an email that you should attend an interview at so date in a particular company. Days to the day of the interview, what are the things you are meant to do? Then a day before the interview, what are you supposed to do? On the day of the interview, what are you supposed to do? Then after the interview, what are you supposed to do? We are going to cover all these questions I just raised extensively so that you'll be fully prepared before you appear for the interview. After that, we will now go into most of the difficult questions that are normally asked during the interview that make people to fall down flat because they don't know the techniques to answer these questions. We are going to discuss in details how you are going to tackle this question, the methodology, the technique that you employ in answering these questions so you will not be among the people that will fall flat on their face during the interview. So we are going to cover a lot of ground. So I will beseech you to fasten your seatbelt as we drive together along and do justice to this course titled How to Be Successful During a Job Interview. Let's go on. Now, before the interview, what are the do's and don'ts you're supposed to put in consideration in preparation for the date of the interview? Number one, reread the job description and think how you can communicate why you will be a good fit for the position. You know, they listed the criteria on their job advert before you applied. and you thought you meet those criteria at least 60% before you throw in your application. Now you should expect that they want to really know whether you are truly qualified or not. You have written it on your CV, you can do this, you can do that. It is not enough to convince a recruiter that you actually possess these skills. So the major reason for the interview is to sit down with you one on one, either physical or virtual, for you to convince them you actually possess these skills and you can apply them positively to move their company forward. So before you attend the interview, day before the interview, you have to go back to that job advert, read the skills, underline them one after the other, and answer the questions whether you meet those criteria, you actually possess what it takes to work in that position because they are going to test you based on those skills. So ask yourself those questions and answer yourself to be fully prepared for the question they might be asking you during the interview. That's one. Secondly, review the organization website and social media activity. This is one of the areas where most people fail. I have been in a position to interview hundreds of people for a very big international organization, and I can tell you that most candidates fail at this stage. A lot of candidates will appear for the interview without knowing anything about the organization they want to work for, not even the name of the MD CEO of the organization. Some of them try to know the MD CEO name, but they pronounce it wrongly. They massacre the name. All these things are counting against you negatively. So before you attend an interview, go to their website, know the name. First of all, know the date of establishment of the organization. If possible, note all the MD CEO that have been in that company from inception to date. Note the name of the current CEO, the names of the directors, the different departments they have, the goal and objective of the organization, the mission and the vision of that organization, to prove to them that you are actually interested in this organization, that you are not just a random a job seeker that do not even know anything about the organization. So you have to prove to them beyond any reasonable doubt that you are fully ready to work with that organization. So you cannot miss this aspect and you cannot afford to fail. Please go and research very deeply about the organization you are applying to work for. It's very critical. Number three here, know about current trend and event that might impact your future employer. Maybe is there any policy, government policy that has just changed that you believe can have negative or positive impact on this organization? Is there any change of environment? Is there a change in taste and fashion that you think can affect this organization? All these things you have to display this knowledge but during the interview in order to wow your interviewer. So you cannot afford to miss this aspect as well. Please go and do your research very well. Then lastly, try to get insider knowledge of the organization by speaking with LinkedIn contact, alumni, peers, faculty, family, and other contacts who may have a deeper understanding of the organization. Now you want to work for a particular organization, you have to go and research or find out their culture and value. And the best way to find out is to contact the insider, the person that is already working for this organization. And how do you get to know this person? The easiest way is to go through your LinkedIn connections. Look through your connections. You might have been connected with one or two people that are working in that organization. You can use a third party to link up with the people working in that organization. But the most important thing is that you need to get in touch with somebody that have the insider knowledge of what is happening within that organization. All this information are going to help you during the interview. So these are the things you need to put into perspective days, not a day, days before the date of the interview. They are very important and it is very critical that you research very well and know all these things before you move on or before you appear for the interview. we have talked about how to prepare for the interview days before the date of the interview. Now we are going to discuss how to prepare a day to the interview. That is, if you are having an interview tomorrow, what are the checklists you need to go through to ensure that you are fully prepared for the interview you are going to attend tomorrow? Number one, review your notes, resume, cover letter, job description, and company/industry summaries. We discussed in the last slide on what to do before or days before the date of the interview. Now, when it remains a day to the interview, you have to review everything you research, starting from the note you jotted down, probably when you went to their website, the name of the MD, CEO, names of the directors, different departments that they have, their vision, their mission, their objective, all these things that you jotted down days before the date of the interview. This is the right time to review everything in case you have forgotten one or two things. The effort will prove to worth it at the end of the day. So don't be caught unaware. The job description, go through them again, how you answer them, go through them again, answer them all over again to ensure that no questions will throw you off the balance when you are face to face with the interviewer. Secondly, for an in-person interview, that is the interview that you have to go in person to attend, not the one happening virtual. For an in-person interview, know the route you will take to the interview location and how much travel time you will need. Build in additional time to ensure you will not be late. So what we are talking about here is that for the interview that you have to be physically present, you have to have known the direction. If possible, visit the location a day or days before the actual date of the interview, because it is not the date of the interview you'll be confused about how to locate the location. This is not the time to be asking the people by the roadside to direct you to the company where you are going for an interview. All these things will have been known even when you wake up in the middle of your sleep and ask you to visit the location, you must be able to get it there without stress. You should also factor in the time it will take you to get to that location. You should also factor in the traffic. If the route to that location is always full of traffic, factor in the traffic so that you get to your location much earlier than the time they ask you to appear for the interview. You cannot afford to get to your interview location late. It will count very seriously against you. And any serious organization will never consider you, no matter how qualified you are, once they notice that you cannot keep to time. Number three, prepare an appropriate interview outfit. You cannot just put on anything anyhow when you are going for an interview. Appear your best, appear professional as much as possible. You cannot be going for an interview in a bank, for example, and you are putting on a polo t-shirt. You cannot be going for an interview in a bank and you are not putting on your tie, except in a bank where you know that they have done away with tie. The putting on tie is not part of their dress code. Otherwise, you have to put on your tie, you have to put on your suit, and your clothes have to be very neat, well ironed, not crumbled. All these one are very important. So days before the interview, let your clothing be ready, well ironed, well dry clean, and don't wear color riot. You have to ensure that you are very neat. You don't need to appear expensive. That is not what we are talking about here. But you need to appear simple, professional, and neat. Your hair must be well trimmed, your beard must be well trimmed, your nails must be well cut. You must ensure that you appear very appealing to your interviewer, because this alone has some marks allocated to it. So you cannot afford to miss this mark. Number four, make note of the name and title of the interviewer or the person you will check in with. in case they have sent you the name of the person that will interview you, or the particular room where the interviewer will be waiting for you, or the hall, please take note of their name. Let their name be ringing in your head. The room number, let it be ringing in your head. You cannot afford to miss your way by the time you get to the premises of the company or where the interview is taking place. So you cannot afford to miss all these things. Number four, have the following items prepared. Number five, rather, have the following items prepared: copies of your resume. Yes, I know that you sent them your resume before they call you for the interview. Please go with another copy, even if they don't ask you to come with one. I know that when they are sending an email and invite for an interview, they usually list some items they expect you to bring along. Please ensure that every single item they ask you to bring along, they are with you by the time you are appearing for the interview. So go with your resume, go with copies of your credentials. Some organization will even require you to come with the original copies of your credentials. If they ask you to, if possible, go with your original and go with photocopies, because they may have to collect the photocopies from you right there after the interview. So go with all these things. If possible, go with your reference. They may ask for it. You may go with a note and a pen in case you want to be jotting something down by the time they're asking you questions. Nobody will penalize you for that. That is number five. The number six here is get a good night rest. You know, we are talking about a day before the interview. This is not the day to sleep late. That was why we said that you have some things to be done days before the interview. So it is not a day before the interview that you model everything up. The day before the interview is for you to review what you have already prepared. So it is not the time to be burning the midnight candle. It is the time to sleep earlier so that you'll be looking refreshing by the time we wake up the following morning and you appear for the interview. Because how you look when you are applying for the interview is another mark entirely. So you have to appear very sharp. You cannot appear looking dull. You cannot appear looking sleepy. All this will be communicating negative vibes about you to your interviewer. So you have to have a very good night rest, sleep on time, so that you wake up very fresh, very refreshing, very clean, and very agile, very active by the time you are waking up the following morning and you are going ahead to attend your interview. So all these points are very critical. Please don't miss out on any one of them. Go through my slide once over again and again to know how you are meant to prepare a day before the interview. You cannot miss anyone out. Missing anyone out can be very traumatized and can be something that will throw you off the balance. And once you are thrown off the balance, you lose the confidence. And once you lose the confidence, your interviewer, they will say it right in your face that you don't have the confidence. And I don't think any organization will be willing to employ anybody that is not exuding confidence. So confidence, how you carry yourself, your courage, is one of the things the interviewer want to notice in you the moment you are walking into the interview room. All these things have to be there and you have to fully prepare for them. That is all you need. These are all you need to do a day before you appear for the interview. These are the checklist. Let's move on, please. Okay, we have talked about what to do a day before the interview. The next thing we are discussing here is what to do on the day of the interview. And I'm going to divide this into two. What to be done on the day of the interview before the interview begins, and what to be done on the day of the interview during the interview session itself. So we are starting with what to be done on the day of the interview before the interview begins. Number one, be on time. We already discussed it. It is not the day you have to lose your way and route to the interview venue. You have to leave your house as early as possible so that you arrive the venue 15 10 to 15 minutes earlier. And if you ask me, I would suggest the minimum of 30 minutes earlier because of the situation around us, most especially if you are in a busy town or city like Lagos. You have to factor in a lot of unexpected situations, and traffic is the major factor you have to put into consideration before you set out in the morning. So the minimum you have to give the allowance that you'll be there 30 minutes at the minimum before the interview session begins. Secondly, bring the supplies you prepared the night before your interview, all those jotting, all those rehearsal, all those preparation, your note, bring it along so that while we are waiting within those few minutes, you can go through them all over again. Then number three, be considerate and polite to all staff members, most especially when you are doing on-the-site interview and the staff are passing through in front of you while you are sitting down. Try as much as possible to be polite to people, greet them, have eye contact with them, because some of these people might be in the interview panel that will take you on, or one of them might be the particular person that will interview you. No one can tell. That is why you need to be very polite and courteous in dealing with them while in that premises. Number four, put mobile device on silent. A lot of candidates make this mistake. Whether you are doing on the site interview or virtual interview, your phone must be on silent. It must not ring out while the interview session is going on. Number five, avoid any scent that may be distracting the interviewer, most especially if you are doing physical interview. Yes, it's good to wear a perfume, but ensure that your perfume is not offensive to the extent that it will be repelling your interviewer, and your interviewer will not be comfortable sitting close to you. You have to be mindful of the kind of deodorant and the kind of perfume you put on. Then lastly here, enter with a positive attitude. By the time you are entering into the interview room, please enter with your head raised up, with your shoulder high, not that you are trying to be proud, but you are trying to be confident. Look directly into the eyes of the interviewer with a smile, greet them warmly, and ask for the permission whether you should sit down or not. But what I'm saying here is that the confidence must be exuding from you. It must be radiating from you. It is very key. Now we have considered what you need to do just before the interview, just before they call you in on the day of the interview. Now, what are the do's and don'ts when the interview session is going on? That is the next thing we are going to consider right now. Let's find out the day of the interview, during the interview. Number one, listen carefully to the interviewer and make sure you answer the question your interviewer is asking you. Attentiveness at this stage is very key. Don't unnecessarily be interrupting your interviewer when they are speaking or asking you questions. Listen attentively and answer them accurately, correctly, succinctly, without elongating it unnecessarily when you are trying to answer their questions. Your attentiveness is part of what they are measured, and it's part of what will be graded at the end of the day. Secondly, relate your skills, accomplishment, and objective to the need of the company. The company, they are not charity organization. They are looking for the addition to their workforce, people that will work in a team to move the organization forward. So those skills that you think you possess, you must be able to relate it with what the organization is currently do or what they intend to do, so that they will know that you are the best fit for the job. Now, provide specific examples when possible using SARA method, that is situation, action, result, and application. We are going to learn more about this subsequently. But what this is saying is that you have to use example to answer some of your questions so that they will fully understand that you have been in that shoe before and you understand where the shoe pinch is and you know how to handle the situation. The next one here, which is number four, focus on the positive aspect of your training and experience. You don't have to apologize for any perceived lack of experience or background. What we are saying is that you focus on the negative aspect of your training or past experience. You don't need to be repeating something that is negative. You have to focus on positive, what you have done and what you are capable of doing. So number fifth here, use clear and direct language. Avoid using filler words such as or you are saying like. All these things are not necessary. So what we are saying is that use simple and correct English to answer your interviewer's questions. Don't be using big grammar that may throw you off the balance, that your interviewer may find difficult to understand. Just try to be very simple, but more importantly, ensure that your sentences are correct. You cannot be there and be massacring the grammar. You have to speak a very simple and correct English that your interviewer will find very easy to understand immediately. The next one here is that maintain eye contact. It is very important. When they are asking you questions, don't be staring at the floor. Raise up your head, look directly into their eye with confidence. That is part of what they are measuring and you will be graded on that. So you have to make sure that you maintain the eye contact with your interviewer. If there are multiple interviewers, remember to engage with all of them. If there are many, as any one of them is speaking, you turn around quietly and stare that person directly in his eyes. So anybody that is talking, make sure you have eye contact with that person. You cannot avoid that. Somebody cannot be talking to you in a panel interview and you are looking at somebody else, or you are looking at the wall, or you are looking at the ceiling. You have to make eye contact with whoever is talking to you. It's also very important. Be aware of your body language. I always tell people like 70% of your communication is done by your body language and not by the sounds coming out from your mouth. So as you are speaking, don't be saying one thing and your body language is saying something else. You have to marry your body language with the voices that are coming out from your mouth. This also is very important to ensure that your body language is corroborating what you are speaking from your mouth. Observe the people and office space to get a sense of the company's culture. Just look around you. Don't blindfold yourself to the situation in of the environment where the interview is taking place. If you do not have the interviewer's contact information, request a business card so that you can send them a thank you note at the end of the interview. So what we are saying is that it's very important to have a means of contacting the people that interview you or the particular person that interview you and thank that person at the end of the interview, either physically or via the mail for the job well done. This one is not compulsory, but if you can do it, it is very good and it won't take anything away from you. It will even endear you more into the mind of your interviewer. This one also is very important if you can do it. All right, we have talked about what to do days before the interview. We talk about the things to do a day before the interview. We talk about things to do on the day of the interview. Now we are going to talk about the things to do after the interview. These also are very important and part of what you need to do when you are undergoing a recruitment process. Number one, send a thank you note within 24 hours of the interview. How do we do it? It might not be convenient to ask for the business card or the name of your interviewer because they may not want you to encroach their private space. But you will agree with me that a mail was sent to you for the interview. You can just simply reply that mail. Number two, you can also, if you, what I know these days is that most companies have a software for recruitment. So if you reply this mail, the particular person that interview you might get your response, but whatever the update this person is putting on the software, you, the candidate, you will not be getting them. So most of the software, as you are responding to your mail, your interviewers that are already on that software are likely to get your response, and they may not acknowledge it, but they might say it. So it might be a plus for you. Try as much as possible to respond, to reply your mail after the interview, to thank the interviewer and to thank the organization itself for trying to give you an opportunity to be part of their family. That's number one. Number two, evaluate your performance. After the interview, evaluate yourself. How did I perform? Did I perform well? What didn't I do correctly? Did any questions stump you? Did you falter to answer any of their questions? Consider how you can improve your answers for the next interview. It is likely that they call you for another interview, second stage interview. So you have to analyze yourself, and this will guide you on how to prepare for the next stage of the interview. Number three, think about what you learn about the position and employer during the interview. You know, during the interview, it's possible the interviewer are telling you some things you might not know about the organization, to let you know the kind of organization, excuse me, you want to work with. So all these things that you learn during the interview, you have to put them into practice to guide you in the next interview. Excuse me. Number four, if a job offer is provided on the spot, which is uncommon, it is appropriate to thank the employer and tell them whether they can give you some times to give appropriate response, and ask them that what is the minimum or maximum time frame they are expecting you to give them a feedback. This one also is very important. Then lastly, if you do not hear from the employer after the hiring timeline they initially contacted you, follow up once. For example, if you look at the interval between the time you submitted your CV and the time they call you, and you compare it to the time frame between the time you had the interview and the time you didn't get a feedback from them and it's getting too long, you can contact them, but contact them once, contact them and tell them how you really want to work with the organization, how you want to be part of their family. There is nothing wrong in doing that. So this are the things you need to do or you are meant to do after the interview. Now that you have dealt with all this extensively, the next stage we are going to now is how to answer some of the difficult questions that usually pop up during the interview. And I can tell you for free that if you can master this stage that we are going to very well, accurately, there is no gainsaying the fact that 80 to 90% of the questions that they'll be asking you during the interview, you already prepare for them and you will not falter before you answer these questions. That one is very sure, because if you notice or you have been going for the interview, you notice that most of the interview questions are like repetitive questions. They may ask them in another way, but they are the questions you are familiar with. So you are going to get to know that. And one of the most difficult questions the interviewers usually has are the scenario question. How do you answer a scenario question? We are going to teach you all this by the time we get to the next module of this course, where we are going to extensively and highlight all the questions, possible questions that may throw at you during the interview, and how you are going to professionally and intelligently answer these questions. Let's move ahead. Interview stage is the most important stage of a recruitment process. It is the stage where critical decision about the employability of a candidate is being made. and it is the stage where many people fall flat on their face. Like I said in the previous modules, almost all the candidates that find themselves at this stage met the minimum requirement for the post advertised. But it is at this stage the best of the best will be selected. So we can simply put it that this is the stage where the best among the best is being selected. So you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that you are the best fit for the job. Now I'm going to start with most of the difficult questions that the interviewers usually throw at the candidate at this stage. Usually they start with the simple questions and they graduate to the complex questions. And along the line, they are taking notes of the suitability of that candidate for the job being advertised. So in this module, we will be dealing with formal job interviews because our focus is to secure a job in a formal environment. So at the initial stage, in the last module, we discuss the do's and don'ts of the interview. In summary, we discuss what you are meant to do days before the interview, what you are meant to do a day before the interview, what you are supposed to do on the day of the interview, and what you are meant to do after the interview. All these are very necessary, and I believe by now you have mastered them. You can always go back to the training to look through them once again as many times as possible so that they become part of you anytime you have an interview to attend. So the next thing, like I said, we'll be discussing here is how to answer the difficult questions that usually throw off the balance when we attend an interview. If you apply for traditional job, you have a formal interview. That is very correct. You have a formal interview, either a physical interview or a virtual interview. They are going to interview you to actually verify all the claims or most of the claims you put in your CV. Also, some of the questions you are similar to the additional questions in the job post that you saw will be asked. They want to actually know whether you possess the skills you claim to possess in your CV. Now, this module is going to do three things. Number one, it will help you to learn how to deal with difficult interview questions. Number two, it will show you how to buy time in an interview. Thirdly, it will introduce you to what we call STAR, STAR technique, for giving strong and confident answers. I want you to underline this. Strong and confident answer, it requires a strategy. Even if you know the answer, but you don't know how to present it, you may still fail. So we are going to teach you the STAR strategy so that your answer will be very strong and you present it with confidence. Now, how difficult do you feel about formal job interview? Before we move ahead, we want to know how comfortable you always feel anytime you are going for a formal interview. And if you want to rate yourself between the scale of 0 to 5, what would you rate yourself? 0, 1, probably 2, it means you are not confident. 3, 4, 5, it means you are confident. 3, 4, 5 shows some degree of confidence, with 5 signifies highest confidence. So if you are asked to rate yourself on how you feel anytime you are going for the interview, which of this scale, which number on this scale will you pick? If you are picking something like this, or you are picking 1, or you are picking to, you are meant to be in this training, in this course. Even if you are picking three, you are meant to be in this training. If you are picking four, you are meant to be in this training because this course is going to teach you how to achieve this five highest level of confidence. Even if you think you have this kind of confidence, by attending this course, we are going to elevate your confidence and you will know that there are still a lot of things you need to know when it comes to attending an interview. So basically, what I'm saying is that this training is meant for everybody, whether you are the first applicant, whether you are a fresh graduate, whether you are a trained hire, you have some experiences, and you are looking to switch a job, looking for another job. This training is well suited for you, and you cannot afford to miss this course because we are going to discuss it extensively, cover as many areas as possible, so that by the time you are going for the next interview, it is either they hire you or they hire nobody. That is the objective of this course. So let's move on. Here are some typical interview questions. Which one is the most difficult? If you have been attending a job interview, I'm very sure you'll be familiar with these kind of questions you are looking at on your screen. Number one question here, what do you want? Why do you want to work for this company? I don't think any interviewer, a recruiter, will miss this kind of question. Number two, what are your strengths and weaknesses? This also is a very, very common question. Number three, tell me about yourself. In fact, that is normally an introductory question. That is the question they will use to ask you to introduce yourself to the interviewer, who you are, your background, where you are coming from. In summary, how your academic, how your career journey has been. In brief, this is the question they will use to get that information. Now, number four here, give me an example of a time you did something wrong. How did you handle it? Now, if you look at these four questions very well, you will see that there is one particular question that seems to be most difficult to answer, that seems to be the one you need to think critically before you answer it, because you may not have a pool at the back of your mind where you can bring it out easily. Is it number one question? Is it number two question? Is it three? Is it four? Let me help you out here. The most difficult question, and I'm going to help you out based on my experience of attending and interviews, and based on my experience that I have been in a position, even still in the position, to interview a lot of candidates for organizations. So I can tell you for free that the most difficult question that the candidates usually struggle with is number four question. And we have a particular name for this number four question. We call it behavioral question. It is most difficult question an interviewer can ask a candidate because it's very technical question, and from this singular question they are going to deduct a lot from the kind of person you are. So you cannot afford not to answer this question very well. So this behavioral question, we are going to deal with it extensively as we go ahead in this course, and the techniques you are going to be applying so that you will not find yourself in a fix by the time the question is thrown at you. Let's move forward. Now let's answer the question on the screen. I've already explained it. Here are some typical interview questions. Which one is the most difficult? Obviously, our answer is this. Give me an example of a time you did something wrong. How did you handle it? Like I explained in the previous slide, it is most difficult question to answer because it is a behavioral question. We are going to learn a lot about the behavioral question before we come to the end of this course. Okay? Now, this is another question I put on the screen for us to answer. I put these questions or similar questions intermittently for us to be in tune with what we are discussing here. This question is just to test what we might have earlier on explained. It is very necessary because this training is very practical. It's not theoretical, and we call it do it yourself training. So we want you to grab every single detail we are going to be discussing here. That is the reason we put all these intermittent questions along the line, just to be testing our understanding of what we have been discussing. And if there is any reason for you to go back to the previous slides to actually understand and be able to answer this question, you can actually do that. But the most important thing is that we must all understand fully what we are talking about in this course. So the question on the screen that we are looking at here is, you don't need to prepare or practice answering easy interview questions. That is, since the questions seem easy, we don't need to prepare for it, we don't need to practice it. Is it true? Is it false? Our answer here is false, because no matter how simple and a question seems, it's worth preparing for. You see, sometimes these questions that we believe are simple might be the ones that will throw us off the balance. That is why no question is too little or too small to the extent that we believe it does not worth being practicing before the day of the interview. So the answer here is false. It is always good to prepare, even for easy questions. You want your answer to be interesting and not too long. That is even the more reason we need to practice the easy question. You want to make it very succinct. You want to summarize it. You don't need to be using long, long sentences for you to answer a simple question. So if you are prepared for it beforehand, it will be a lot easier for you to answer without beating about the bush. Now, this is another one. How are some more easy and medium easy questions you can practice answering? Now, we are talking about simple questions, moderately easy questions. So I have examples here that you can use to practice. In the previous slide, we agree that no matter how simple a question is, we still need to practice it before we appear for the interview. So here I have some list of seemingly simple questions and how we believe you can handle them. Let me show you some examples. As you are seeing them, you can be doing the rehearsal of how you will answer these questions in case you are asked during the interview. Now, the question about you. Definitely, they will ask question about you. And the first question after exchange of greeting is usually, tell us about yourself. Tell me about yourself. So they want to know your journey of life so far, whether academic or career-wise. Now, another seemingly simple question is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Yes, we call this one simple question, but to a lot of candidates out there, it is a very difficult question. And you have to be very technical in answering this question so that you will not shoot yourself at the leg. I'm going to show you the examples of how to answer this question, most especially when you are talking about your weaknesses. You don't make your weaknesses very glaring when you are describing it, and you don't want to say that that weakness actually made you worse. You are going to look for how to turn that weakness to positive thing that will speak good things about you. We are going to talk about it extensively as we proceed in this training. Then the next seemingly simple question is, what are your responsibilities in your current job? I don't think that one also should be a difficult question to ask. If you are currently employed, you are doing some tasks in your current employment. You should be able to state these are what I'm currently doing. And if you are no longer employed and you are doing something in your previous work, you should be able to state it. This is what I was doing in my previous work. And if you have never worked before, you let them know that this is your first job hunting, but these are the things you have done maybe when you were in school. that you think can be beneficial to the organization. So all these things are termed simple or medium easy questions. Now they are likely to ask you question about the job. That is the question that will be centered around the actual job you perform or what you are currently doing in your present job or you perform in your previous job. So these are the likely questions they will ask you. Why do you want this job? Now we are centering this one about the one you are aspiring to get, the one we are interviewing you for. You must have a particular reason why you want to do this job. So your interviewer will want to know why do you want this job? You must be able to express yourself clearly and convince them that you actually need that job. The next question is, why do you want to work for this organization? Why not another organization entirely? So why choosing our organization? Why not the next organization that will belong to the same industry? You should be able to convince them why you choose them specially and why you think they are the best company for you to work. You must be able to state this as well. Now the third question under this is, what do you know about our company? A lot of candidates fail when it comes to this. A lot of candidates appear for the interview with zero knowledge about the company they want to work for. This is very bad. Please, if you have find yourself in this kind of situation, don't ever allow it to happen again. It is a serious put off to every interviewer. Now, the next one is the question about career development. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? If you have been attending an interview, you will see that this is one of the most common questions they will throw at you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Secondly, what are your goals for this year? They don't want to impress somebody that has no ambition. You must have something that you are passionate about you want to achieve. So when they're asking you that what are your goals might not necessarily be that organization objective. It might be your personal objective that you want to achieve through that organization. So these two questions also you have to be very technical in answering them. All the questions I've been talking about so far about your question about the questions about you, the question about your job, and question about your career development. They will turn them simple questions because you believe it is what you should be able to easily answer if you are prepared before you come for the interview. But I can tell you, as simple as these questions seem, a lot of candidates find them very difficult to answer because they come forward for the interview with zero or nothing preparation, with zero preparation. So if you are not prepared, then you are writing letter to failure. So preparation is key in whatever you want to do. So all these questions I've been asking so far, tactically will be answering them along the line as you proceed in this course. All right. So far, we have been talking about direct questions that the interviewer usually asks the candidate. We call them direct questions because we believe the interviewer already have some information where it can pull the answer from. So they seem easier than some questions. So we are now graduating to another form of question that requires critical thinking and reasoning before they can be answered correctly. They require some steps and they require some strategy to handle them correctly anytime you are facing such questions. So we call those questions behavioral questions. Now the next thing I believe you want to ask is, what is a behavioral question? I'm going to explain exactly what behavioral means. At the beginning of this lesson, like I said, we give one a particular example. And this example is, give me an example of a time you did something wrong. An interviewer asking a candidate that give me an example of a time you did something wrong. This kind of a question, the answer may not come in handy, most especially if you didn't prepare very well. So it's a question that requires some tactics, that requires some methodology if you want to actually answer them perfectly and satisfy your interviewer. And that is exactly what we are going to be doing in this particular part of this course. Now, the next thing we are going to be doing now is that we are going to listen to a voice of an interviewer where she is explaining to us what behavioral question actually means. Please, let's listen attentively.
My name is Jamie Taylor, and I work for JAMA Recruiting. A big part of my job is interviewing candidates for all kinds of different jobs. No matter what the job, many of the questions I ask are the same. These are the usual questions like, tell me about yourself, and what interests you about working for this company. Those questions are important, but they don't really tell me how you will perform if you get the job. So I ask what we call behavioral questions. They're questions like, tell me about a time when you did not satisfy the client. What did you do to leave the client satisfied in the end? Or, give me an example of a time when you were under a lot of stress. What was happening and how did you deal with it? These questions can be very difficult because you don't have a lot of time to think about your answer. That's one reason they're very useful to us as recruiters. Another reason is because we have a saying, the best way to predict the future is to look at the past. So, if we know what you did in the past in a situation, we can be pretty sure that's what you'll do next time too. If we don't ask questions about behavior, there is the risk that we give the job to someone just because we liked them, or because they were the friendliest candidate, or something like that. Maybe they're nice people, but they might not be right for the job. So, my advice for you on how to prepare for the interview is look at the job and think about the behaviors they might ask you about. For example, difficult customer situations, or time management, or high stress. And use Google to find examples of common behavioral questions and practice answering them. Good luck!
All right. We have just listened to perfect explanation of what behavioral question means and the reason interviewers like asking behavioral question. Most of the questions the interviewer asks all candidates are almost the same. If you have been attending some interview, you will attest to that fact that the questions are somehow repetitive. But they usually ask behavioral questions just to know the kind of person you are, how you relate or react to some particular situations. And like she said, the only way, one of the most effective way to predict the future is to look into the past. So they want to see how you handle such situation in the past so that if such situation arises in your new job description in the organization, they want to know how you will handle such. So it's just to know your behavioral pattern, it's just to know about your emotional intelligence because in a workplace, what is more important is emotional intelligence, not academic intelligence. Academic intelligence will help you to some extent to secure the job, but how well you do on that job depends a lot on your emotional intelligence because in that situation now, you'll be dealing more with people and how well you can work with people determine how successful you will be in that organization and on that job you'll be performing there. So emotional intelligence is very critical and one of the sure way of testing your emotional intelligence is through asking a behavioral question. By now, I believe you understand what a behavioral question means and the reason interviewer they love asking behavioral questions almost at every interview. Now that we have that knowledge, let's move on and deal more with these behavioral questions. Now, let's look at this question critically. Tell me about a time when you did not satisfy the client. What did you do to leave the client satisfied in the end? This one also is an emotional question. They want to know how you handle this kind of situation in the past. It's a behavioral question that is leveraging on your emotion. So they are testing your emotional intelligence. How did you handle such situation and how well you handle it? That is why they are asking this kind of question. But outside this, I want us to look at this statement very well grammatically. Is there anything wrong with this statement? I've already told you the meaning. We all understand what the question is trying to say. But let's look at it grammatically. Is this statement, this sentence correct grammatically? Let's look through it by applying our primary school English methodology. Now, tell me about a time when you did not satisfy the client. What did you do to leave the client satisfied in the end? No, so looking at this, we can see that what is actually wrong grammatically in this sentence is satisfied. It's supposed to be, it's not supposed to be in past tense. It's supposed to be in present tense because it's preceding this verb did. So instead, it's supposed to be tell me about a time when you did not satisfy and not satisfied. So let's cross it out and see whether we got it correctly. Of course, we got it. You can see that it has changed. Now, this one is put there to test our attention. Paying attention is very critical. Also, when you are attending an interview, you have to listen attentively to understand the question they are being asking you. But if they're asking you A, you are answering B, it shows the interviewer that you pay less attention to things. And if you are working in an environment, you are looking for somebody to work in an environment where they require rapt attention, it means that you cannot be a good fit for that kind of position. So you have to ensure that you pay attention to details, you cross your T's, you dot your I's, so that very few things will go wrong or nothing will go wrong by the time you assume working with that organization. So this part of what they also test when they are interviewing the candidates. Now that we have understood what behavioral question means, we are going to list out some examples of behavioral questions. What I want you to do is to get a clean sheet of paper, note each of these questions, and try to answer them as much as possible. After you have answered them, look through them yourself. If you are satisfied with your answer, you will know. Then you are going to now measure your answer based of what I'm going to teach you subsequently on the format in which the answer to behavioral questions should be. We are going to use STAR technique to actually explain what are being expected in your answers when you are responding to behavioral questions. But I want you to jot down these questions and try to answer them in order to get yourself familiarized with behavioral questions. You will learn how to answer them in self-study 3. By the time we get there, you will learn more about how to answer them. This one is just like a rehearsal. Number one, what is the most difficult decision you have made in the last 2 years, and how did you come to to that decision? Now, when they are asking about the decision, it doesn't necessarily have to be the decision in your former place of work or in your current place of work. It might be decision about your life in general. It will be better if you have a scenario of something that is related to your work, but if it doesn't come to mind, they just want to hear how you took that decision and the outcome of that decision. That is what this question is talking about. So note it and try to answer it in your own way as much as possible. The next question here is tell me about a time where you had to deal with conflict at work. Here it is very specific, conflict at work. You all understand what the conflict means. Conflict doesn't necessarily mean fighting one another, and it might be maybe you have to wade into the quarrel between two of your colleagues. Conflict may be in terms of conflict of work. So think through it. It might be conflict in your personal life that you can relate to work. So think through it and tell us about a time where you had to deal with conflicts at work. But this time, let it be at work because they are very specific about work. So you don't need to go outside the work into your personal life to give an example. Stay within the work. Number three, what was the last project you led and what was its outcome? Last project can be in any scenario. It can be during your university day, it can be in your personal life, it can be in your former place of work, it can be in the present place of work. Like we said earlier, they just want to look to know what how you behave in the past, to know how you are going to apply the same thing if they arise in the future, and if you are lucky enough that you are employed in the organization and you are working for them, they want to know how it's going to play out. Have that at the back of your mind when you are answering behavioral questions during the interview. Now, the another one is, can you describe a time when your work was criticized? This one is very normal. When you are working in an organization, it is not all the time your work will be praised. There will be one or two times that your work will be criticized. How did you handle criticism in the past? They want to know how you did it so that if it happens in the future, they want to know how professionally you are going to handle it. Now, this is the last question we are going to deal with here. Tell me about a time you disagree with a decision and what did you do? Because you are not a rubber stamp, you don't have to be saying yes to everything, even when it is contrary to your opinion. In a professional organization, it is usually well appreciated if somebody, a person or a staff, can be vocal. You have to say, you don't have to follow the crowd. If you know that everybody is following one direction and you have a different opinion, you are free to express it, but express it in a professional manner. That is exactly what they are asking here. That tell me about a time you disagree with the decision. Then after disagree, what did you do? They want to know and they are interested in knowing. These are similar questions, similar behavioral questions you might be facing by the time you are sitting face to face with your interviewer. Now that we have understood the definition of behavioral question, we have understood the format in which they can come. The next thing we are going to deal with now is how to tactically delay answering behavioral question. Like I told you, behavioral question is something that can catch you unaware and you need some seconds to quickly reflect before you start dishing your answer out. So there are some delay tactics that you can use that your interviewer may not know that you are using delay tactics in order to give yourself some seconds to think very fast before you start answering this question. So in the subsequent slides, in the next module we are going to now, we are going to be discussing all that. In the last slide, we talk about delay tactics that you can employ when you are answering behavioral questions. So here we are going to expatiate on it. We call it buying time. That is another way of saying it. You say you buy time. Now, how do we buy time when we are trying to answer questions, most especially behavioral questions during the interview? There are many tactics of doing it without appearing funny or without interviewer suspect that that is exactly what you are trying to do. So we call it language for buying time and avoiding negative. So instead of saying some things that are irrelevant to the question you are being asked, you may need some time, few seconds to reflect on what to say before you start speaking. So that is exactly what we'll be dealing with here in this module. So we are going to be watching videos, and these videos we are going to be answering some questions to test our understanding of the video. Like I said earlier on, the aim of this training is to teach you practical way of doing all these things and not theory. So we are not teaching theory here, we are teaching practical, and we make it as practical as possible so that when they wake you up in the middle of the night, you will still do the same thing exactly what you will do during the day. It means that it has become your DNA. You can also teach this thing to some other people that need the assistance, because the essence of this training basically is empowerment, the youth empowerment to assist the youth in getting their dream job as fast as possible without waiting too long for years before they secure a job. That is exactly the main purpose of this training. So we'll be dealing with all this now. All right, let's quickly answer this question. True or false? In a job interview, it is okay to ask for time to think before answering the question. Ordinarily, there is nothing wrong in it. You can actually say, "Can you give me a moment, please?" And don't let it be more than few seconds. So ordinarily there is nothing wrong in you asking for time to reflect before you answer the question. But there are some better ways of doing it, because if you are asking verbally, your interviewer may take it for something else. But there are some other ways of still getting this time, buying time without your interviewer suspecting or without making your interviewer uncomfortable. So the answer here is true. You can actually ask for some time, few seconds, before you proceed with the answer. But that is not exactly what we are dwelling on here. We are dwelling on the other tactics you can use to buy time, to reflect before you start answering your questions, so that you align with the kind of answer your interviewers are asking you. So the answer here is true. Yeah, it is true. In this lesson, you will learn ways to buy time without asking for it. But it might surprise you to know that it is okay to say, "Can I have a moment to think about it?" There is nothing wrong with it, like I said. Or even just to pause and think for a few seconds before you start. For example, they ask you a question, you just pause for like 2, 3 seconds before you start giving the answer. Nobody will penalize you for all this one. But there are still some other ways of doing it easily and conveniently and you still achieve the same thing. That is exactly what we are emphasizing in this video. So now we are going to watch our first video. I want you to listen attentively to this video. I'm going to use the subtitled one so that as you are listening, you can also be reading the subtitle for you to fully understand the context of this video. So let's move on, please.
Yeah. So that was my last project. I'm actually expecting to have more work from that client in a couple of months.
Great. Can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative?
Sorry, there was a problem with the internet. Quite hear you. Could you ask that question again?
Of course. Can you hear me now?
Yes. It seems to be okay now.
I said, can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative?
Ah, yes. I think there's a delay on the call now, but yes, initiative. Good question. Initiative is really important, and I have a good example. I had a project where the client wanted me to present 10 different ideas so they could choose one. So I presented 12, and I also told them the advantages and the disadvantages of each option. That way, I helped them make a good decision by sharing my knowledge.
That sounds great. So we're almost finished now. Can you tell me what your biggest weakness is?
Are you looking for an example of something I'm not good at?
Yes, something like that.
Okay, that's an interesting question. At university, I used to be quite bad at managing my time. but I knew it was a problem if I wanted to be a freelancer. So I found a course online on time management. There were some really useful tools and ideas for organizing your time. I use those tools every day, and now organizing my time well is completely natural to me.
And finally, has a client ever complained or not paid you?
I've heard that happens, but I've always had a great working relationship with clients. My clients have sometimes been very demanding. They know what they want and they make sure they get it. But I like that. For one thing, it's very clear what they want, and it means I push myself harder to help them achieve their goals.
Well, that's the end of the interview. Thank you for talking to me today. You can expect to hear back in a few days. Bye now. Thanks.
All right. I hope you listen attentively to the video because there are some simple exercises we are going to be doing together immediately after this video now. So let's close the video and move on. Um, okay. Put the questions in the order you hear them in the interview. If you listen attentively to that interview, there were three basic questions that were asked. So they want us to rearrange this in order of the questions that were asked during the interview. Now, the first one they put here, as a client ever complained or not being paid? If you listen attentively, you will notice that this was the last question the interviewer asked. Can you tell me about your biggest weakness? Can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? This was another question that was asked, and this was the second question. Now, can you give me an example of a time when you show initiative? And this was the first question. So they expect us to arrange this question in order at which they were asked during the interview. So I'm moving this to the first one to be the number one question asked. Then the number two question, can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? This was the number two question that the interviewer asked, and this was the last question. So let's see whether we got the order. The reason for this is to actually test that you listen attentively to the video. If you know that you didn't listen very well and you feel like rewatching it, you can go back and rewatch it. But the order should be in this form. That is correct. The first question, can you give me an example of a time when you show initiative? Number two, can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? Number three, has a client ever complained or not paid for you? So these were the order of the question. Now, this is exactly not where we are going. What we are actually interested in is how the candidate used delay tactics to answer those questions correctly. In answering all the three questions, he actually used delay tactics, and that is what we are more interested in. And those are the things we'll be discussing from now on. Let's move on. All right. I want us to watch this interview video once more because in the subsequent slides, we are going to test our understanding of the video. The video, like we watched earlier on, is about an interview and the explanation of how to buy time during the interview. So we need you to watch this video more critically now and pay more attention because I want you to watch out for the strategies the candidate use in buying time. Let me give you some hints about the strategies I want you to pay up attention to. Something like, oh, that's a good question. When the candidate was asked a question, instead of going straight to the point to answer the question, he said, oh, that's a good question. There was another instance where he said the internet was not strong enough. If an interview is taking place online, it can also be used as a means of buying time during the interview or drinking water, things like that. So I want you to watch out for these strategies in this video when you are watching it once more, because there are a couple of questions we are going to answer together just to test our understanding of how to buy time during an interview. Let's watch.
Yeah. So that was my last project. I'm actually expecting to have more work from that client in a couple of months.
Great. Can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative?
Sorry, there was a problem with the internet. I didn't quite hear you. Could you ask that question again?
Of course. Can you hear me now?
Yes. It seems to be okay now.
I said, can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative?
Ah, yes. I think there's a delay on the call now, but yes, initiative. Good question. Initiative is really important, and I have a good example. I had a project where the client wanted me to present 10 different ideas so they could choose one. So I presented 12, and I also told them the advantages and the disadvantages of each option. That way, I helped them make a good decision by sharing my knowledge.
That sounds great. So we're almost finished now. Can you tell me what your biggest weakness is?
Are you looking for an example of something I'm not good at?
Yes, something like that.
Okay, that's an interesting question. At university, I used to be quite bad at managing my time, but I knew it was a problem if I wanted to be a freelancer. So I found a course online on time management. There were some really useful tools and ideas for organizing your time. I use those tools every day, and now organizing my time well is completely natural to me.
And finally, has a client ever complained or not paid you?
I've heard that happens, but I've always had a great working relationship with clients. My clients have sometimes been very demanding. They know what they want and they make sure they get it. But I like that. For one thing, it's very clear what they want, and it means I push myself harder to help them achieve their goals.
Well, that's the end of the interview. Thank you for talking to me today. You can expect to hear back in a few days. Bye now. Thanks.
Okay, good. I hope we enjoyed the video once again, and I hope we follow the three questions the interviewer asked the candidate and how the candidate delay answering each of those three questions. Now, in our subsequent slides, we are going to test our understanding of this video we just watched now. So let's move on. All right. Now, match each interview question to the strategy. Like I said earlier on, if you watch the video critically, you will realize that the candidate used different strategies to delay answering each of the three questions he was asked during the interview. Now, let's look at it to test our understanding. Now, number one here, can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative? That was the first question the recruiter or the interviewer asked the candidate. Now, what were the strategies the candidate used in buying time before he answered the questions? Let's look at our options. Here, he pretends their internet problem and he didn't hear her. That was the strategy he actually used. You know, when the interviewer said, can you give me an example of a time when you show initiative? It occurred to the candidate immediately that he needed to think fast. He needed to go inward and bring out a scenario that would satisfy the question he was asked. So it was not something that came to mind within a split of seconds. So he needed few seconds to actually gather himself together to answer the question. And what he used in buying that few seconds was that the internet was not that strong. So you can only use this if you are attending an online interview. Subsequently, if you are attending a physical interview, we will tell you some of the strategies you can use in this instance also to buy time. Now, let's move on to the second question the interviewer asked the candidate. Has a client ever complained or not paid you This was actually the third question. Now, how did the candidate answer this third question? How did they buy time in explaining it? He avoid giving a direct answer. If you watch that video critically, you will see that the candidate didn't answer the question directly. Rather, he avoided the question and still satisfied the interviewer. It is one of the ways to avoid a very difficult question. You will not avoid it obviously to the extent that the interviewer will know what you are trying to do, but you can tactically avoid that question and still get the nod of your interviewer. That was exactly what happened there. You can go back to watch the video once more so that you note that particular part and understand fully how that question was managed. Now, the last question here, which was the second question that the interviewer asked, was, can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? During the interview, you don't just lay yourself open out there. Yes, we all have the weaknesses, but you must know how to explain your weaknesses so that you turn to a strength for you, or you explain technically the lesson you learn that you have been applying positively to subsequent things that happen after that. So you don't just go there and say, this is my weakness. What have you done about that weakness? What are you doing about that weakness? When that weakness happened, what did you learn? These are the things that interviewer actually want to know. So now back to the question, can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? What was the answer? He says the question in a different word to check he understood the question correctly. So he rephrased the question. He rephrased it to ensure that he understand correctly. When he was satisfied that he understood the question, he now answered it in such a way that the weakness turned out to be positive thing at the end of the day. So the essence of this is that you must know how to buy time during the interview, because it is not always good to rush into the answer by the time they ask you questions during the interview. You need some few seconds of reasoning, thinking, put your thoughts together so that you come out as an intelligent person when you are answering the interview, and your answer will not be disjointed to the dissatisfaction of your interviewer. So I hope you understand what we are trying to explain here. So in the subsequent slide, we'll further reinforce how to delay answering question, the delay tactics, different form, different phrases you can actually use without the interviewer suspecting you that you are exactly trying to avoid or delay answering the questions. Those are the things we will continue to deal with on this slide. They are very critical. Most of the candidates got knocked down because they were asked the question they didn't prepare for. And instead of them to have 5 seconds to think through the question, they rush into the answer and they mess it up. And I don't want the similar things to happen to you. And if it has been happening to you, I want you to stop. That is why we're having this lengthy discussion about how to buy time during an interview. Let's move on, please. This is another question to test our understanding of the interview video. Now, the question reads, in which two questions does the interviewee buy time by saying that's an interesting or a good question? When the candidate, the interviewee, said that's an interesting question or that's a good question. So let's choose our answer. Has a client ever complained or not been paid? He didn't say either of that's an interesting or a good question when the interviewer asked this particular question. Like I said, you can always go back to watch the video once again. Then the question two, can you tell me what your biggest weakness is? Yes, he said that's a good question. Then this question now, question number one, can you give me an example of a time when you showed initiative? Remember, this was the period he was initially saying the internet was not strong enough. And at the end of the day, when he said, yeah, the internet is better now, he now said that's a good question. So question number one and question number two, the candidate actually said that's a good or interesting question. It's a form of buying time, like we learned earlier on. Yeah, correct. This little filler is useful too, but again, don't use it to don't use it in every time you need to think. So don't just be reading it repeatedly that every time an interviewer asks you a question, you must say that's a good question. Well, you become to sound funny by the time you are repeating it again and again. It will be sure to use it for question number three. That question number three again, where let me show it to you. Question number three: has a client ever complained or not paid you? You know, if you say that's a good question in that instance, it will sound somehow funny. Let's move on. Now, there is one more thing the interviewee does to buy time. We have been explaining the phrases, the words that the interviewee or the candidate have been using to buy time. There is one more particular one we have not mentioned yet, which is drinking water. And that's what we are trying to remind us here, that there is one more thing the interviewee does to buy time. What is it? He drinks he drinks some water. Yeah. If you are in your house, make sure you have a glass or a cup of water at hand. If the interview is in an office, ask for some water before you start. Well, it is not in all cases that you ask your interviewer to provide you with water before the interview starts. But if peradventure there is a bottle of water that is meant for you, that already been placed on the table, there is nothing wrong in sipping from that water, but you must ask for the permission first from the interviewer whether that water is meant for you and whether you can take from that water. But if you are attending an online interview and you are at the comfort of your room, of your sitting room, in front of your computer system, you can have a bottle of water by the side so you can sip it. It's just a system of buying time as well. Don't forget to use difficult questions to show something positive about yourself. A lot of difficult questions can be asked that it require a lot of thinking before you answer. What we are saying here is that you use the opportunity of those difficult questions to say positive things about yourself. Let's consider some of these difficult questions that you may be asked during an interview. You know, Employers ask questions like, "What are your weaknesses?" This is one of the most difficult questions to answer. Or, "Tell me about a time you failed at something," or, "Have you ever had any complaints?" It's a difficult question to answer. Let's consider another one. Yeah, instead of just complaining about your weaknesses, telling them what you are not good at, you can show yourself but instead of showing yourself in a negative way, tell them about a time you learn something or turn a bad situation into a good one. It's one of the best strategies to handle difficult questions. So, like I said, you can watch the video again and again. The more you watch the video, the more you have the understanding and the more you get yourself prepared for the interview ahead. Now, we have learned various strategies of buying time. The next question is, which of these strategies you love most? It depends on you. If you ask me that which of the strategy I love most is about restating the question, that is my option. It might not be your option because restating the question serves two purposes for me. Number one, it made me understand the question clearly, though it is not all the time I'll be rephrasing the question. It makes me understand the question clearly. Number two, it allows me to buy time. So it serves two fun purposes for me. So if it is me and I'm being asked that which of these options is best for me to buy time, I will gladly choose this option number two. Now we are going to listen to this audio now, and they are going to give us a series of phrases we can actually use to buy time. So let's practice it as we are watching. Say to yourself again and again. You can use their intonation in saying it, practice it very well so that even while sleeping, you can come up with all these phrases to actually buy time during an interview. Let's listen, please.
1. Sorry, there was a problem with the internet. I didn't quite hear you. Can you ask that question again? 2. I think there's a delay on the call. 3. Good question. 4. Are you looking for an example of something I'm not good at? 5. That's an interesting question. 6. I've heard that happens, but... 7. Can you explain what you mean by failed? 8. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say it again, please?
All right. So these are the phrases or languages of buying time during an interview so that your answer will not be totally off the track. So before we round off on this particular slide, we'd like to break it down into pieces, the strategies or languages of buy time for each of the scenario you may find yourself. For example, buying time with technology, most especially when you are doing online interview, you can be saying so that sorry, there was a problem with the internet. I didn't quite hear you. Another one, can you ask that question again? Another one, I think there's a delay on the call. Now, when you are doing face-to-face interview, what are the phrases you can use to buy time or clauses? They are like this. Can you explain what you mean by? Then another one, sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say it again, please? Now, restating the question is another strategy, like we said. Are you looking for an example of so? You are buying time indirectly. Another one here, commenting on the question. That's an interesting question. That's a good question. That is a difficult question or good question. Commenting on the question just to invite time. Then the last one here is avoiding answering. How do we avoid answer? I've heard that happens, but you know, systematically you avoid answering that question. So far, so good. We have come to the last part of the training on how to be super successful in a job interview. We have talked about different strategies, different technique that we can actually use to ensure that we come out in flying color anytime we attend a job interview. So this last part is very crucial and is going to explain what we call a behavioral question. A behavioral question, like we learned from other parts of this course, is one of the most difficult questions when it comes to a job interview. And this is where a lot of interviewing, that is the candidate, fall flat on their face when they are attending a job interview. This is exactly what we are going to be doing justice to here. We are going to break it down into pieces and explain to you how you can actually structure your answers when you are dealing with a behavioral question, which we have all agreed that is one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult questions in a job interview. So let's go ahead and deal with it decisively. Now, you have heard examples of difficult questions from our previous lessons. how behavioral question is difficult. You have also learned some strategies to give yourself time to think and avoid directly answering a question. That was when we are talking about the strategies to buy time. Now we are dealing with the last part, how to structurally answer a behavioral question by following the techniques that we call STAR. STA how. All right. I hope we enjoyed the video we just watched. So the next thing now is to test our understanding of this video by dealing with some simple questions around STAR technique. So the first one here is, what is the STAR technique? The first option, a way to buy time to think before answering behavioral questions. Option number two, a way to memorize long answers to questions. Option number three, a structure for answering behavioral questions. So like we learned when watching the video, the STAR actually is a technique for answering a behavioral question. It's a structure for answering a behavioral question. So our answer here is option number three. Correct. So let's move on. So the next thing here is, which four words make up the STAR technique? So they want us to explain or to pronounce what each of these alphabets stands for. We also watch it in the video, and in the video, Jem explained it distinctly what each of these alphabets stand for. Now they want to test our understanding whether we actually follow the video and we digested what we learned. So by applying the video we watch, we are going to answer this question now. So X stands for situation, that is the scenario that you are trying to paint. YT stands for task, the actual task you perform when you find yourself in that scenario, or you are being expected to perform when you find yourself in that scenario. The next thing is A, which is action, what you actually did to perform that task. That is A, and that is action. And the last one is the result. When you perform an action, a result is expected. So, what was the result that happened at the end of the whole scenario that you explained? And that is result. So, S stands for situation, T stands for task, A stands for action, and R stands for result. Now here, they want us to match each of the words in the acronym STAR to their true meaning. So we are starting from action. Action can match which of these statements here. Is it what you achieved? Is it the things you did or steps you took? Is it the things you needed to do? Or is it the context of what you are trying to explain? So action is exactly what you perform, the step you took to deal with the task at hand at that particular point in time. That is action. So action will go with this. Task is the thing you needed to do. Result is what you achieved. And the situation is the context that explains the background to your story. Correct. Now, let's move on, please. Now, when we are watching Jamie, she trying to answer a question that give an example of a time when you had to prioritize your time to achieve a goal. Now, if you watch that video critically, there was something Jamie kept saying. She kept saying, "Hi, I did this. Hi, I did it." She mentioned "hi" 4 times. The question is, Jamie was not probably the only person in that scenario. How come Jamie was not saying we? The answer is the interviewer that is currently sitting down in your front is not interested in what you achieve together. He or she is interested in what you as a person achieved, because he or she is not going to employ your team in your previous place of work. He or she is trying to employ you. So what you can deliver is what matters here, not what you collectively delivered over there. So that was the reason in giving an answer to that question, she kept saying "hi, hi." Now let's look at what they expected us to do. If you are part of a team, you will say "we" in your answer. No, even if you are part of a team, we are more interested as an interviewer in what you in particular achieve. So it is not true. This statement is not true. So we are going to drag it to the first side because it is forced. Correct. Let's move on, please. Which 5 verbs are power verbs you can use for describing your action? Now, this is a follow-up to the question we just answered now. So let's look at the power verbs you are expected to use when you are describing what you did in your previous place of work. And they are expecting us to mention 5. Now, let's go on. I was a member. No, they are not interested in you being a member. I implemented. Yes. What you did. I set up. Yes. I was responsible for. No. I designed. Yes. How many have we take? One, two, three. I organized. I organized. Yes. I created. Yes. So I think we have selected up to 5 now. I was responsible for, we are not interested in. I took part, we are not interested, like I said, in what you did collectively. We are more interested in what you as a person did. Correct. We got it right. Let's move on. Now, let's go straight to the phrase bank. Phrase bank is just a bank or a reservoir, let me call it that way, that give us the idea of the kind of phrases we can use when we are trying to explain the situation, the task, action, and result during an interview when we are answering a behavioral questions. So by the time you practice these phrases again and again, they will come naturally when you are trying to answer a behavioral question during an interview. So let's look at the phrase bank, the similar things that we may likely say when we are trying to explain each aspect of a STAR technique. So we are starting with situation. You know, when trying to explain a scenario where you find yourself, you may say, in my last role as a marketer, in my last role as an operation manager, in my previous work as admin manager, things like that. So this is just an example of the phrase you might use when you are trying to narrate the situation that you find yourself. The task, it means I was tasked with, I was in charge of, my job function was. These are examples of the phrases you can use when you are trying to explain the task. For action, I organized an event, I set up a database, I designed a website, I scheduled a meeting, I created a poster, I implemented a change. If you look critically, you will see that there is nowhere you see something like we. We are not interested in we are interested in you. So tell us what you did. Then the last one, when you are trying to narrate your result, you can say, I learned if at the end of the day, it's not in all cases that what you did will be 100% successful. But at least if it was not 100% successful, you should have learned something. So you can say, I learned. You can say, as a result, I achieved A, B, and Z. As a result, I achieve so and so. That is what you are being expected to stay here. So these are just examples of the phrases you might use when you are explaining a behavioral or you are trying to answer a behavioral question. Star questions. Now try to answer the questions you saw in this lesson. All these questions you are seeing here are just for practical purpose. Practice them as many times as possible or your whole spare time after you have undergone this training. Write down these questions and practice them again and again. You will see that when you are being faced with the interview, there's a high probability that similar questions will be asked. Now, the number one here, what is the most difficult decision you have made in the last 2 years and how did you come to that decision? This question is in twofold. They are expecting you to answer it in two ways. Number one, the most difficult situation you find yourself, that is scenario. Then how did you come to that decision? That will have to be explained. By the time you are going through the task, the action and result, you are going to explain everything. So you are meant to apply what we actually call a STAR technique in answering this question. Number two, tell me about a time where you had to deal with conflict at work. The number three question here, what was the last project you led and what was its outcome? Number four, can you describe a time when your work was criticized? Then number five, tell me about a time you disagree with a decision. What did you do? Go and practice all these five questions. Answer them as quickly as possible and as accurate as possible. But please remember, when answering them, ensure you apply STAR technique. All your answers must contain the four parts of STAR technique. There must be situation, there must be task, there must be action, and there must be results. Now we have been talking so far, we have been discussing about how to be successful during the interview right from the beginning and we are approaching the end. Though this is not the very end, but we are approaching the end. Now, if you want to rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5, how confident are you now to go and face the interviewer and be very optimistic that you are going to come out in flying color? How optimistic you are, how confident you are now. Rate yourself. If you cannot rate yourself number 5, it means that you have to go back to this training right from the beginning and start listening to this video all over again to the end. It means that probably you have not been paying enough attention. I'm sure before you started this training, you might be at number one, at number two, not so confident. Your heart is beating as if it will jump out of your chest anytime you have an interview to attend. By now, you should be looking forward with optimistic to any interview with the intention and mind that you are going to blast it. And that is how it's supposed to be. Confidence is very key. It's one of the key factors they are going to rate you with. So if you appear there and they see that you are down already, it is a negative mark for you because every sensible and serious employer want to employ a confident person that will be able to take critical decision, not somebody that will be hiding under the table when it is a time to take a vital decision that will affect the organization objective. So you cannot afford to look less less determined. You cannot afford to be looking low. You have to be looking very much confident. So this is the level we intend to take you to. Number five, nothing less. So if you are not at number five, go back to the training, like I said, and watch the video with rapt attention, with minimal or no distraction this time around, and grab every single point we have been explaining so far. So in this module, what have we learned? Number one, we have learned how to deal with difficult interview questions. Number two, we have learned how to buy time in an interview. We have also learned how to use the STAR technique for giving strong and confident answers. Now, the next thing we are going to do, which is the last, is how to deal with a practical scenario of answering a behavioral question. Let's go, please. So, let's practice what we have learned so far about answering a behavioral question. We have learned how to deal with difficult interview questions. We have learned how to buy time in an interview, and we have learned how to use STAR technique. So now, use what you learn in this module to answer questions in an interview for a new project. So we are going to use an example of an interview for a new project because it will be useful for a person that is seeking to be employed in an organization, and also for a person that is trying to secure a contract, like an entrepreneur that is trying to secure a business. So this particular practice question we are going to go through will be useful for either of them. Now, you submitted a proposal to work on a project. The company has asked to meet you before they make a decision. You agree to attend an online interview, the one you sit at the comfort of your home, your sitting room, or your office to attend while you are looking at your screen, looking at the video of your interviewer. You will need to Number one, what are the things you will need to be successful in this interview? You will need to buy time. We have explained the techniques of buying time. Secondly, you will need to answer behavioral questions because they want to know whether you have seen that a particular situation in the past, how you handle it, to know or to see if you find yourself in such situation in their company or concerning the project they are going to give you, you also handle it effectively and successfully. That's what you want to find out. Then number three, how to use that technique in answering your behavioral question. We have explained all these things in details in the past, so we are going to apply them practically now on this slide. Now, the question from our interviewer is, what do you want? Why do you want to work on this project? This seems like a simple interview question. Of course, before you want to take on a project, you have a reason you want to take on it and you believe you are qualified. That is exactly what they want you to say. Once you are qualified, you have what it takes, you should be able to answer this question. Now, why do you want to work on this project? We have two answers here. Number one, I like the aim of this project and I love working on something from the beginning. Number two answer is, I'm not sure. Can I think about that for a moment? This number two answer is very, very wrong. It portrays you very wrongly. So we all know that the answer to this question is number one. So let's move on from here. Great, thanks. This is an interviewer now. Now, can you tell me about a time you disagree with a decision? Yeah, this is exactly where we are going because this is a behavioral question, a typical example of a behavioral question. Now, how do we answer this? You are not sure how to answer it, right? Now, let me be of help. Buy a little more time. Anytime you are being thrown a behavioral question and you seem a little bit confused at the onset, please buy a little more time. We have discussed in details how to buy time during an interview. So apply any of those skills to buy time. Now, this is the example of how to buy time. That that is a that's a good question. This is one of the clauses you can make use of when you are trying to answer a behavioral question and you want to buy time. That is a way. We have many examples. I won't go into detail because we have already done justice to them. So let's move on, please. Now, after you have said that is a good question, the next thing is to apply star to answer that behavioral question they ask you, and you are starting from the situation. Number one, S situation. So what you are trying to do here is to narrate a situation where you find yourself in a similar scenario. I was I was what? I was working as a project manager on a marketing campaign. This is S now, situation. You have just painted the situation. I was working as a project manager on a marketing campaign. Now, the next thing they now put here is the project went well and I learned because it is time to disagree with colleague, but it is important to commit to the team decision. If you look at this statement very well, it is the last part of star, which is result. So we cannot jump from situation to result. It means that something is missing. We are going to find out. But before we go on, they actually want us to read this statement. I want you to read this statement. So there is something missing there or not written very well that I want you to correct. So in reading it, you will find out. So this because it's not very correct. It's supposed to be that. The project went well and I learned that it is fine to disagree with colleagues, but it is important to commit to the team decision. Next, I was tasked with managing team communication. I wanted to use Zoom, but the rest of the team prefer Skype. This is task now. Here also, they want us to cross out what is not very correct. Now, let's read the situation. I was tasked, this is supposed to be past tense. The essence of this is not to teach you English. The essence of it is to force you to read that statement. So this is supposed to be in past tense. Actually, I was tasked with managing team communication. I wanted to use Zoom, but the rest of the team prefers Skype. This is the task now. Let's move on, please. Now, let's fill in the gap. This supposed to be action. What did you do? Because you want an option, other people in the team preferred another option. Now, what did you do? What action did you put in place to convince them at least to see it the way you are seeing it, to buy your idea? What did you do? I demonstrated how to use it, but we decided on Skype. I committed in the spirit of the project. I committed to the new plan and implemented the tool as the team agreed. Now, we saw that the whole thing were not sequential. We were expecting to see situation, task, action, and result. But what we have been reading, they are not sequential. Now we try as much as possible to see if we can actually rearrange all these sentences we have just read that so that they will follow the sequential arrangement of star. You have all the elements of a good answer, but you can structure the answer better. Take a sip of water to think about it. Just think through it so that you have the idea of how to properly arrange it. Take a sip of water and think through it. Now that you have bought time by sipping water from a glass of water, what next? How do you answer the behavioral question you are just being asked? You use STAR technique. We have explained it. It is the best way to answer any behavioral question. STAR techniques. I demonstrated how to use it, but we decided Skype. I committed to the new plan and implementing the tool as the team agreed. That is not number one. So what we are trying to do here is to phrase the question and rephrase our answers. So what we are planning to do here basically is to start with situation. So from all these 4 points that have been listed here, which one is the one that explains the scenario, the situation that stands for S? I was working as a project manager on a marketing campaign. This should come first. The next one is task. So what is the task? I was tasked with managing team communication. I wanted to use Zoom, but the rest of the team preferred Skype. This is the task. Now we are looking for the action. I demonstrated how to use it, but we decided on Skype. I committed to the new plan and implemented the tool as the team agreed. This is the action. Then the result, the project went well and I learned that it is fine to disagree with colleagues, but it is important to commit to the team's decision. This is the perfect arrangement of how to use to answer a behavioral question. Thanks. That's great answer. This is the comment from your interviewer. Even if your interviewer does not say out loud, in their mind, they're already giving you 100% mark. Because if you apply your star correctly at the right time, you can hardly get it wrong. So, phrase bank again. When dealing with interview questions, and you want to buy time. This one is just the summary of what we have just been explaining so far. You want to buy time, you can buy time at any particular point in time during the interview, whether you are doing a physical interview or you are doing an online interview. So here we are going to be talking about some of the phrases you can actually make use of when we are trying to buy time, irrespective the nature of the interview you are undergoing. So we are starting with buy time with technology. What are the phrases that can actually help you to buy time when you are attending online interview? Because that is where this one is applicable. You are using technology to facilitate the interview. So buying time with technology. Let's find out. Sorry, there was a problem with the internet. I didn't quite hear you. Though you may hear very clearly, but you needed some seconds to quickly ruminate over the question you are being asked, you can use this as an excuse systematically, but don't let it be glaring. Secondly, second option is sorry, there was a problem with the internet. I didn't quite hear you said it earlier. The second one is, can you ask that question again? No, you pretend as if you didn't hear the question well. But you hear the question well, but you needed some seconds to think about it. So you ask the question again. Can you ask that question again? The number three here is, I think there's a delay on the call. As if there is a time lag between the time the interviewer is speaking at the other side and the time you are actually getting the information, pretending as if there's a time lag. All these are technique and they are allowed if you know how to use them effectively without arousing the suspicion of your interviewer. So when you are undergoing an interview online using technology, your computer, your internet, all these are technology. So these are the phrases you might actually use to buy time. Now, when you are doing face-to-face interview, what can you use to buy time? Can you explain what you mean by? This time around, you cannot say there is a time lag. You cannot say, I think there's a problem with the internet. There is nothing like internet. Your interviewer is sitting right in front of you. And at the same time, you need to buy time. What will you do? So that's exactly what we're explaining here. Can you explain what you mean by so and so? You are buying time. Another one, sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say it again, please? You are buying time. Now, this is another strategy, restating the question. You hear the question, but you will restate it. Not that you didn't understand it the first time, but because you want to buy time, you restate it. Like, are you looking for an example of something I'm not good at? Or are you looking for an example of so and so? You are stating the question just to buy time. Another one here is commenting on the question. Like, oh, that is an interesting question, or that is a good question, or that is a difficult question. Or you say, good question. All these things are strategies to buy time. There's another one here, avoiding answering. For example, they ask you one particular difficult question and you don't want to answer it because at that particular point in time, nothing even comes out of your head. You can't even remember any situation in the past where you demonstrated that or something like that, and you want to avoid it. There is a phrase that can help you. You can say, I hear that happens, but that bet will take you off that question. And if you know how to handle it appropriately, your interviewer will not go back to that question again. So, lastly, our star, our big star. Situation. In my last role as CSO, task, I was tasked with CSO. Action, I implemented a number of changes. Result, as a result, I finished both projects yearly. So with this, I can conveniently say that we have come to the end of how to be successful, how to be super successful in a job interview. If you have been attending job interview and you are not getting a call back, then definitely this is the time to put a stop to it. And I can guarantee you there is no way you can go through this training with full attention on how to be super successful in a job interview from beginning to the end that you will not see a change, a significant change in your interviews. Most of the organization that interview you will definitely call you back. So if you still know that there are some things you have not actually gotten, from what we have been discussing so far about how to pass an interview, go back right to the beginning and study every single video right from the beginning to the end, and I can guarantee you that the failure during the interview will be a thing of the past in your career history.